with CNN legal analyst Elliot Williams, Dave Ehrenberg, the state attorney for Palm Beach County, Florida, where so much of this case has been focused. Defense attorney and former federal prosecutor Shanlon and CNN reporter Sonia Mogi from outside the courtroom. Sonia, let me go to you first. The jury deliberated over about 6 days, and some were wondering whether, the way this was taking its time, that perhaps that might work to Maxwell's advantage, but it didn't, clearly didn't.
Yeah, it just goes to show you that you just don't know what a jury is thinking. The only window that we have are those notes that they send out. And they sent out notes asking for transcript after transcript. Almost a third of the witnesses who testified transcripts they had requested. They asked for poster board and Post-it notes. And it really seemed like they were literally going back to the drawing board at one point in these deliberations. But, clearly they worked together and they came up with this unanimous verdict. This is a big deal for the survivors of abuse, not just of Ghislaine Maxwell, but also of Jeffrey Epstein, who killed himself at the detention facility not far from this courthouse, just behind it, actually. When he killed himself, so many of these victims were devastated because they felt that they had finally gotten to a point of where they could have gotten justice for their abuser, and then he escaped that justice. And, even after his arrest, so many women had spoken about how they also wanted to hold Ghislaine Maxwell accountable. So this verdict today, I'm certain, will be one tiny piece of justice for these women, many of whom were girls when they were abused.
Yes, they've been waiting for justice for years. And Dave Ehrenberg, what's your reaction to this verdict? Guilty of 5 out of the 6 charges. And, some of what Ghislaine Maxwell and obviously Jeffrey Epstein, what they were accused of, focused on what was going on in your neck of the woods there in Florida.
Yeah, Jim, I think this is long overdue. I think Ghislaine Maxwell got what was coming to her because Jeffrey Epstein could not have succeeded in his criminal sex scheme without her help. Jeffrey Epstein was some creepy middle-aged guy. I mean, he showed up outside of high school asking a girl to get in his car. They would tell him to get lost. But he had Ghislaine Maxwell, a very charming, sophisticated, attractive woman who made the girls feel comfortable. She helped groom them and sometimes even engage in sexual activities with them. So without her, this stuff probably wouldn't have happened. Jeffrey Epstein wouldn't be Jeffrey Epstein. So she is just as guilty as he is under the law for a lot of these crimes, and she'll be facing some serious penalties ahead.
And Shanwu, Maxwell is guilty of the most serious charge she faced, sex trafficking of a minor. This confirms she was not a bit player. She was aiding and abetting this. She was facilitating this. She played a role in this abuse. Isn't that right?
Oh, absolutely. That's right. And I agree with Dave on this point. She was integral to his scheme, although his actions and schemes were probably even broader than this, and he can't be brought to justice now. But I think this sends such an important message for survivors, which is that prosecutors are finally beginning to get the idea that this kind of crime doesn't happen in the dark with just a one-on-one situation where you have only the victim's word. Other people know about it, other people help, and this has been slow in coming. It's a trickle. We've seen some of that in the R.Kelly convictions, but hopefully it's a change that's going to continue down this direction for victims.
That's right, Sonia. And, Maxwell's team was arguing that she was being scapegoated for Epstein's crimes, that essentially she was sort of, filling his chair in this trial. But as Shan Wu was saying, it sounds as though the jury really put a lot of stock into the accounts of these victims.
Absolutely, and it makes sense because the victims were there when this abuse happened, and so having these women who were girls, testify about their experiences is so crucial, and they moved through the women pretty quickly, and at times where some of the women were sort of advised by the federal judge overseeing this case, Judge Nathan, not to go into a lot of detail about some of the abuse, but some of these details about, for example, Jane, who testified under a pseudonym, she testified that she met Maxwell and Epstein when she was 14 years old at a summer camp where Epstein was a benefactor. And so many of these accusers talked about Maxwell's role in this and how someone like Maxwell would be brought in to make them feel more comfortable and feel that they could confide, and she could tell the girls things like, you have the perfect body for Jeffrey, is what one accuser said that she told her. So all of these things are meant, all of these things that Maxwell was, people testified that she did, were meant to normalize sexual behavior. This is something you see often in these predatory situations. I saw it in the R.Kelly trial a couple months ago with witnesses testifying about the same thing. There's someone else there who's normalizing this behavior, making it seem okay to lure the girls deeper into a situation like this. So very important testimony, and very difficult to give that kind of testimony, especially in front of someone who you say abused you.
Very disturbing. And Elliot, Maxwell now faces up to 65 years in prison. She just turned 60 on Christmas. So she faces the prospect of potentially the rest of her life behind bars. What do you expect from her sentencing, and what are the prospects that she could potentially help federal prosecutors land a bigger fish, so to speak? Could that potentially, lighten that sentence for her? What do you think?
Yeah. Under normal circumstances, it would, but the question is, who's the bigger fish? Normally, you would flip a convicted defendant and go after someone higher up on the totem pole. That individual is Jeffrey Epstein, and he's deceased now. So she couldn't actually do that. Now, perhaps there are other people who might have played a role in the conspiracy, but prosecutors don't have a huge incentive now that they have a conviction of her. So I'm not certain what the utility would be to prosecutors in trying to get cooperation out of her. What will happen now is, certainly she's going to appeal, and that is her right as a defendant. She can. But what prosecutors will do is point out all of the things that aggravate and make this an incredibly serious crime. The vulnerability and young age of the victims is going to play in to sentencing here. And prosecutors are going to ask, and moreover, she's going to be in prison this entire time.
All right, thanks to all of you, and we'll have more on this breaking story just ahead. Plus,